I hope I don't bring a hole into the legend. That's what I'm hoping.
The year was 1991. Production company Morgan Creek and director Kevin Reynolds had locked horns over Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. It was the first big production for both of them, as Morgan Creek was only 4 years old with only a few mid-budget successes to their name, whilst Reynolds had only directed 2 low-budget films. However, he was aware from the outset that being trusted with a production of this size had nothing to do with his track record and everything to do with Kevin Costner. You see, in his first film, Fandango, Reynolds had cast Costner in his first leading role, and had recently helped Costner with his directorial project, Western epic Dances with Wolves. Morgan Creek wanted him in the title role as their major box office draw, but Costner had already turned the film down.
Kevin is so right for the role, we never really questioned it for a second. You see him with the bow and arrow in his arm and you just know that Kevin Costner is Robin Hood.
Once Reynolds was hired, however, Costner signed up.
The next day, after I got onto that, I get this call from Kevin, and he goes, "Did you know I was on this other Robin Hood with McTiernan?" And I, "No." He said, we were talking about doing this other thing. And I said, "I had no idea." Long story short, the producer, who was very wily, realized Costner was doing this, so he asked me to do the Robin Hood. And so Kevin bailed on the other one and came on to that Robin Hood.
He was making a film, and I wanted to come out here and help.
We're lucky because when we work together, we can speak in a certain kind of shorthand that only comes with knowing someone. And it's great because we can just be completely open with each other.
Kevin's a real visionary and has a real force of will that's very attractive to me. It's magical and it's fun, and I find him really inventive, and we kind of have the relationship that's if he can think of it, I can do it.
If that was why Morgan Creek had hired the director, their plan had worked, but it was not smooth sailing. Morgan Creek had hurried into production to finish its Robin Hood film before 2 other studios came out with theirs, sending producer and co-writer John Watson to hire crew members and scout locations before they even had a director or lead actor. British screenwriters Watson and penned Densham script was a fresh take on the legend, reimagining the title character as a privileged man made socially aware and empathetic by witnessing the horrors of the Crusades. It was the darkest cinematic take on the character yet, while still being a fun action-adventure film. They saw it as Robin Hood a la Raiders of the Lost Ark, but Reynolds didn't want it so close to something that had already been done. He also felt that their script's villain, the Sheriff of Nottingham, was too one-dimensional, and worked to expand the role to give him more wit.
As I was reading it, something it wasn't enough. And as I started to explore the characters and I was trying to find something that would get me excited, I realized I didn't want to take things too seriously in places. And consequently, the sheriff evolved the way that he did.
I consciously wanted the Sheriff of Nottingham to be something more than a one-dimensional Darth Vader bad guy.
The actor to take up the role, Alan Rickman, liked this version of the character, but wasn't crazy about his lines, asking his screenwriter friends Ruby Wax and Peter Barnes to come up with better ones, which Reynolds agreed to.
When I met Alan Rickman, we were both on the same page. He didn't want to play him as some mustache-twirling villain. He wanted to do something different too. And we just completely clicked in that regard.
When you first saw the script and when you started acting it, was it the same thing, or was it changing your character, changing it all?
Oh, it changes a lot, but you rely on the director for that and to allow it to happen. So thanks to Kevin Reynolds, it did.
I'm gonna cut your heart out with a spoon!
I'd say, well, what if you do this? And he goes, okay, but then what if I do this? And it just kept building on itself.
I'm not playing a villain. I'm just playing somebody who has a certain checklist of things that he wants in life, and he goes after them. And other people say, like Robin Hood decides, that's appalling and it must be stopped.
Cancel the kitchen scraps for lepers and orphans. No more merciful beheadings. And call off Christmas.
Brings a lot of humor to the part, but a lot of wickedness at the same time, so that he's a lot of fun to watch.
That was a lot of what made the picture work, was Alan.
When the film was test screened in Sacramento in April of 1991, it had a resounding approval rating of 92%. The problem was that when the audience were asked who their favourite character was, they didn't pick Costner's Robin. They picked Rickman's Sheriff. The studio didn't want their big box office draw upstaged and asked for a cut with more Costner and less Rickman. Reynolds disagreed. He'd already put more Costner in the film in an earlier round of changes and felt like that was enough. The studio took matters into their own hands and, whilst he was away, the studio sent their own team to create a cut they were happy with, locking the editor out of the cutting room.
If I must, I will take you a piece at a time.
When Reynolds saw the cut once he returned to LA, he was not a fan to say the least, saying in an interview at the time, "I didn't feel like it was an improvement at all. I thought in a number of places it was pretty awkward and embarrassing." Before the final editing, scoring and mixing, the director walked away from the film. Whilst Costner was reportedly not a fan of the changes, he didn't try to step in either. This seemingly put a strain on the relationship between the actor and director, but they would remain friends, until falling out on the set of their next film, Waterworld. In 2003, a 2-disc special edition DVD was released with an extended cut of the film, with the Kevins reuniting to record the commentary. So, what were these new scenes? What impact did their absence have on the theatrical cut? What impact does their restoration make to the overall film? Which cut is better? The first difference is 20 minutes into the film, after we've seen Robin escape incarceration in Jerusalem and make his way back to England. Unsurprisingly, all but 2 of the changes are sheriff scenes. The first comes during his second scene. It's not a new scene, but it is cut differently, with a little bit of extra footage. We've already seen him kill Robin's father, and now Guy of Gisborne is telling him about Robin's return. The scene is the same except for the very end. In the theatrical cut, the sheriff says, "I trust that Locksley returned to find the home fire still burning," in a close-up, as the scene cuts to Robin returning to find his castle destroyed. This line is in the extended cut, but it's quieter, as our attention is directed towards an eye with a white iris watching the sheriff through a peephole. A bell on the wall then rings. We see the sheriff run down a gloomy spiral staircase to the basement of the castle to consult Mortianna the witch. The scene from when he opens the door is in the original cut of the film, but it comes after the scene of Robin at the castle. It is very clear that Mortianna was the one at the peephole, and this transition and the order of the scenes reinforces that. Mortianna then reads their fortunes. In the extended cut, it is clear that she is using information she overheard in the previous scene. However, in the theatrical cut, her reading is just vague enough to leave her abilities open to interpretation.
The son of a dead man.
Locksley.
The painted man. He haunts my dreams.
Locksley's companion.
The first completely new scene is nearly 50 minutes in, after Robin has joined Little John in Sherwood Forest. It had originally just cut from Robin asking if they still gave alms to the poor at Mass, to him sneaking into Nottingham dressed as a beggar. Between those scenes, the sheriff is seen in his white robe from his introduction and is worshipping an upside-down cross. He then takes it off and reassures Mortianna that he is going to church for appearance's sake and is loyal to whatever paganism they practice. They call it the old ways, which reminds me of that Merlin Sam Neill miniseries. Let me know if you want me to review that in the comments. Now, the interesting bit about this scene is that it's their first scene that furthers the characters rather than the plot. In the theatrical cut, all of their scenes are about them either plotting to get rid of Robin or plotting to get rid of King Richard whilst he's away fighting in the Crusades. You know, the typical Sheriff of Nottingham stuff. This cut basically makes the relationship between Mortianna and the sheriff its own subplot. The sheriff comments that he sometimes can't tell the difference between Christianity and his own faith. The theme of religion and faith runs throughout the film, and I do enjoy it despite being an atheist myself. As you would expect for the period, everyone holds faith in high regard. The sheriff kills Robin's father and takes his land by claiming that he had confessed to devil worship, and you can see how seriously the characters treat this crime.
Robin, whatever happened between you and your father, you mustn't believe what they accused him of.
In this case, every accusation really is a confession. Robin's Moorish friend Azeem, a devout Muslim, is repeatedly discriminated against for his race and faith.
But he's a savage, sire.
That he is. But no more than you or I.
The drunken Friar Tuck returns to the ideals of his faith by being humbled by Robin and offering his services to those in need.
Are these not the meek of the earth?
We're in need of an honest man to minister to them.
The Lord reveals himself in mysterious ways.
In contrast, the Bishop of Hereford is corrupt and uses his conspiracy with the sheriff for material gain. So, how do the sheriff's new scenes with Mortianna play into this theme? Just keep it in mind for later. We also get a bit of backstory for the sheriff.
Did my parents truly tell you to instruct me in all this?
Their dying wish.
This corresponds with the scene we get later in both cuts, where the sheriff tells the little girl that he never knew his parents, which is the only backstory we had for him in the original film.
It's amazing I'm sane.
Scene comes after the sheriff is told by a scribe how much money he has lost to Robin and that the poor like him too much to turn him in. After the sheriff storms off, the scribe can be seen sticking out his tongue at him. Here in the extended cut, we have an additional scene where Mortianna tells the sheriff about this and tells him to cut it out. This is very brief and doesn't really add much. I suppose it's another instance of Mortianna discovering something that she shouldn't know and her influencing the sheriff. We see the scribe unable to talk in another reinstated scene, but it does create an error because in both versions he tells Robin where to find Marion during the climax. Maybe he was faking it? I don't know. The most minor change to this version of the film is the extended bit of action when Robin and his men are stealing a convoy of the sheriff's gold. The man inside the treasury cart refuses to unlock the door, so Azeem detaches the horses, sending the carriage and Robin into the lake. It's a fun short moment, and the only issue caused by his absence is that Robin is inexplicably wet in the next scene. I imagine it was deemed unnecessary, which is a shame because it's a fun bit of action. It might have also seemed like a bit of a dick move for our heroes, especially as we never see what happens to the man inside. Although they did just kill multiple soldiers in that scene anyway. I don't know, let me know what you think in the comments. Probably the most interesting change to me is this moment here during the party scene in the forest halfway through the film. There's this moment between Azeem and a little girl, which is one of my favourite moments. Azeem is one of the most important supporting characters in the whole film, not only because he has more screen time than any other ally, but because of his connection to the themes and his role in the growth of the other characters.
Is that why you were to be executed? Because of a woman? Was she worth it?
Worth dying for. Is she worth it?
Worth dying for?
You came for me.
I would die for you.
As I said before, he's a devout Muslim, which plays into the theme of faith, but I'd say that he also plays into the theme of characters defying expectations. He's called a savage, and yet he frequently turns out to be the most noble, intellectual, and sophisticated character in the film.
How did your uneducated kind ever take Jerusalem?
In this scene, the child comes over and asks if God painted him.
For certain.
Why?
Because Allah loves wondrous variety.
In the theatrical cut, the exchange ends here. You can't even call it a scene, really. It's just a moment. However, in the extended cut, he continues to talk to her only to be interrupted by Friar Tuck, played by Whose Line Is It Anyway alum Mike McShane, confronting him.
Keep thy heathen words away from the ears of this innocent, or you will answer me.
Azeem responds by asserting that they are worshipping the same god, but Tuck is clearly having none of it and carries the girl off. This is clearly there to set up when Azeem attempts to save little John's wife by giving her a C-section that night and the friar objects. When Azeem succeeds, Tuck apologises and asks to learn more from Azeem.
Today the Lord has taught me a fine lesson. That though I may think I am godly, I know I am not worldly. So you and I open a barrel together and do our best to save each other's souls.
Alas, I am not permitted.
Fine then, you talk, I'll drink.
The thing that interests me is that I can't pinpoint a reason why they would have cut this with any certainty. It may have been because they were worried that the friar would come across as too unlikable. It may have been because they felt it was too drastic of a U-turn for the character to have in one night. It may have been because they thought it was just too controversial. It may have simply been that they thought it was unnecessary and cut it for time. Anyway, I like this version of the scene. I like Tuck in this film in general. He's not too proud to admit when he's wrong, and he also defies what people expect of him by the end. The next new scene comes between Marion's servant Sarah getting attacked on her way to deliver a message to the king, and the attack at Marion's home. This scene takes place at a meeting the sheriff is having with the barons, who are helping him take over the country. He gives them gold, but they tell him that it isn't enough, mocking him for attempting to take over the country when he can't maintain law and order in his own parish.
My lords, why risk life and limb for a man who cannot even snare the paltry bandit who mocked his pretty face?
He responds by telling him that he has hired the ruthless and bloodthirsty Celts to sort them out. They also tell him that he will need to marry a royal to have a legitimate claim to the throne. He says that he is as good as engaged, before cutting to Marion, who, in this version, is the king's cousin. This is an entertaining scene that gives us a lot of information. However, the problem is that in the sheriff's previous scene, during one of Mortianna's readings, it establishes that the sheriff doesn't have enough money to pay the barons because Robin has stolen it, and that he is going to have to solve this problem by hiring the Celts to attack Robin. She also tells him that he needs to marry a royal to have a legitimate claim to the throne, before cutting to Marion. The new scene is a clearer and arguably more entertaining way to set up this information. We see the barons. We see that they will get land in return for supporting the takeover. In the theatrical cut, we only hear them mentioned, apart from a line from one of them during the climax.
My Lord Sheriff, is this your idea of control?
Shut up, you twit!
We see the Celts. We see their show of strength. It also sets up that the barons are part of the Sheriff and Mortianna's pagan worship. However, the Mortianna scene establishes it quicker. We see that the ideas to marry Marion and hire the Celts are both from Mortianna. This influence that she has over the Sheriff is especially important in this cut of the film, but we'll get to that later. Whilst both scenes are interesting, I can't help but consider it inefficient to include them both in the same cut. If there's nothing new to say, then it's just indulgent. After the destruction of Robin's hideout, in which several of his followers have either been killed or taken prisoner by the sheriff, there's a scene in the theatrical cut where the sheriff asks the prisoners in the dungeon to betray the others and find out if Robin Hood is dead. Will Scarlet, played by Christian Slater, has always had it in for the poor little rich boy, and agrees to spy on the survivors. However, the extended cut is a longer version of the scene, which just has extra footage at the very beginning and very end, of Alan Rickman single-handedly upstaging everyone in this movie.
Pain or death?
Death.
Torturing.
Sorry to keep you hanging about.
Pain or death?
Pain.
Torturing. You see, it makes no difference.
The lash, I think. Sorry about that. It'll make it more convincing.
He's a villain who's enjoying being evil, and that's infectious to watch. Like a Disney villain, but grimier. It's moments like this that show that deciding to cut down his role in the film was an absolute crime. The final and most important of the cut scenes comes after Robin and Will's reconciliation. The sheriff is partying, drinking and swimming in his piles of recovered gold, revelling in his success the night before his wedding. He also requests that the hangman doesn't break the necks of Robin's men when they are hung the next morning.
See some dancing.
This scene solves a minor plot hole later in the film. If you know anything about hanging, you know that the drop is supposed to kill the criminal instantly by snapping their neck. They're not supposed to just slowly choke to death on the rope. I wonder if the writers didn't know that initially, but had already written the climax which hinges on that, so they added that line to fill that minor plot hole. But this is such a cool scene that I find its ignorance pretty easy to forgive. It works though because it makes the sheriff seem extra delightfully demented. I mean, he's already celebrating his wedding with a hanging. The sheriff feels a breeze and discovers Mortianna's peephole. He storms over and confronts her, calling her a fake as she hurriedly attempts to do more readings.
I want the truth.
Why? Truth has never served you before.
However, she does tell him the truth, that she is his mother, having killed and replaced the real Sheriff of Nottingham as a baby so that he might rise in his place. His takeover of the throne had been planned from her from the very beginning as revenge for how society had treated her for looking like a freak.
When you stud the Lady Marion, My grandchild takes the throne. My blood will roll through him. We'll see who's freakish then.
He leaves in a stunned silence. This may be the final change, but its impact is definitely felt throughout the climax, recontextualising the sheriff's actions for the rest of the movie. The marriage between Marion and the sheriff is no longer simply to give him a legitimate claim to the throne, but the culmination of Mortianna's decades-long plan of revenge, particularly the conception of a child. The sheriff is still going through with the plan, but he has had enough of her and her faith. When he drags Marion to the castle chapel to be wed, Mortianna has already set up her altar, the contents of which he hurls to the floor. She somehow brought them up with all of the cobwebs intact. When she tells him that Marion is fertile and that he must impregnate her immediately, he retaliates by insisting that they get properly married by the Bishop of Hereford first.
For once in my life, I will have something pure. Will you stop interfering?
She relents and threatens the cowardly bishop into marrying them instead of running away. This new lack of respect for Mortianna without context could be explained away by the stress of the siege and the peasants' uprising, but of course now we know different. The sheriff is eager to rush through the marriage, taking his clothes off and pinning Marion to the floor, showing that he respects the formality of Christianity, but is presumably still eager to fulfill Mortianna's ambition by conceiving a royal heir. This obsession with conception isn't explained in the theatrical cut, so I suppose viewers just assume that it's part of the whole legitimate right to the throne thing, or that the sheriff is just in a hurry to get his rocks off because he's such an evil bastard. Of course, Robin comes in to save the day and kills the sheriff. As he dies, he crawls up to the shattered window, as if reaching up to a god he was raised to reject. Mortianna tries to attack in revenge, but is killed by Azeem. So, the question is, which cut is better? I'm actually kind of on the fence in this one. On one hand, it showcases more of the late great Alan Rickman's performance. It is widely considered to be the best part of the film, leading to him winning Best Supporting Actor at the BAFTAs, whilst his co-star Kevin Costner took home a Razzie. On the other hand, the film functions fine without it. If you have ever studied writing, you're very familiar with the mantra of kill your darlings and know that anything that isn't essential needs to be cut, especially in screenwriting. However, the stuff that is cut is, as we have discussed, not useless. It is also worth discussing that it further complicates the plot. I have to admit, I adore this film. It is one of my favourite films of all time, and whilst I understand many of the criticisms people have of it, and acknowledge that it is by no means perfect, I will still defend it to the ends of the earth, and may well make another video where I do just that. Pretty much every video essayist has to make a video at some point about why a critically reviled film they grew up with on VHS is actually a misunderstood masterpiece. One of said criticisms is that there's too much going on and that this film lacks focus. Whilst I agree that this film does have a lot of characters and a lot of plot points, at nearly 2.5 hours long, it's a film that has the time to do so. Everyone gets enough screen time and plot points are given time to breathe. After all, the Robin Hood legend is known for having a large supporting cast with many colourful characters and his band of merry men, and there are certainly worse problems for a film to have than too many good ideas. However, maybe this is one plot point too many. I have to remind myself that this is a film I know very well, and that maybe a twist could be the straw that breaks the camel's back for someone new to the film. It's gone from showing us what the villains are up to them having their own arcs. After all, the sheriff obviously has a huge impact on the story, but he is inherently disconnected from the rest of the cast. Robin's outlaws all interact with each other and expand each other's storylines. Personally, I do think it might have been better if Mortianna's peephole wasn't revealed until the very end, so that the audience found out that she's a fake at the same time as Nottingham. I'd say that the theatrical cut leaves it relatively open-ended as to whether or not she really has any powers. After all, she predicts that Azeem will kill her, and he does. It's worth remembering that just because this is the extended cut, doesn't mean that it's the cut that Reynolds wanted to release back in 1991. Remember, apparently Costner's role was beefed up in the studio's edit, and no scenes from the theatrical cuts were left out here, meaning that we will probably never see the cut of this film that received that 92% approval rating. I'm not sure what was cut, but despite the fact that I can forgive Costner's accent because of the context of the production, I will be the first to admit that his performance is the weakest in the film. I mean, that is partially because of how good the rest of the cast is. After reading the production history, I've come to the conclusion that Kevin Costner was probably miscast, but also that he did not have ample time to prepare for the role. I think he did the best that he could, and that his understated style of performing works well to contrast him against the colourful characters in this film, even though sometimes it's a little too understated, treading a delicate line between naturalistic and wooden. I will also say that Christian Slater's accent sticks out far more, but I really do love his performance in this. My final verdict is that the theatrical cut is probably the better of the two because it streamlines an already busy film. However, if you are here for Alan Rickman or you like all of this creepy dark paganism stuff, then the extended cut is probably for you. One of my friends is a goth and this is the version I recommended to her because I knew it would be right up her alley. I definitely also recommend it if you are already a fan of the film. I think that either cut is a very good time, and that Alan Rickman is the standout in both. If there's any changes that you think I've missed, that's probably because there were also cuts made to the British version of this film to secure a PG rating, which I discuss in this video right here. See you soon!